Tonight, our speaker is our one and only Kent Toomb. And the nice thing about Kent is something that he does that I'm not very good at, and that's Euro fishing. I'm pretty good at throwing them upstream, but I'm not quick enough to tighten my line up and get those hookups. Every once in a while I luck out, but hopefully Kent can help me out there a little bit. And according to his bio, he's been fly fishing since 1988. And you started Euroing about 8 years ago, and then your fishing just picked up like crazy, correct? Kent.
That's it. Thank you. Tonight we're going to talk about Euronymphing, and we're going to address it what I called from the bottom up. And to me, one of the things that we miss out on is really what happens from the surface down. A lot of times we'll focus on the rod and the leader and everything else. And so tonight we're going to start by focusing from the surface down with the fishing. I started about 8 years ago Euronymphing, you know, started seeing all the same articles most everybody's seeing, the YouTube stuff, and got really interested in it. And then when COVID hit, all of a sudden I had a lot more time on my hands. And so I decided to really try to dive into it even more. And so over the last couple of years, just really spent a lot of time with it and kept learning new things and watched my catch rates increase substantially. And so tonight, what I'm hoping to get out of doing this tonight is that I can give you some ideas that's going to help your fishing. These were kind of, as we went through this, was essentially having a light bulb go on at different times and going, wow, that is so different. And it is just, it's really transformed my fishing, and not only just Euronymphing, but it's helped me in all the other facets of fishing. So tonight what we're going to do is we'll get started. And we'll jump into the presentation, and then what, is that okay?
Yeah, so
Okay.
we do it at church.
Okay. So what we're going to do is go through the presentation, and then let's do questions afterwards. So
Hold on a second. The window closed. Sorry, put it back open again. There it is. Back to here, back to here.
Tim's trying to do a lot of stuff, so this is a first for both of us, with him trying to do the multitasking. It's a first for me doing a presentation, so you may be seeing the first and last presentation they do, depending on how it goes. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at address Euronymphing from the bottom up. And basically, I put this guy here. This is one of my favorite fish, and my fishing changed when I started thinking about the fish first and really starting to just listen to the fish. They'll tell you so much about where they're at and what they want, because the other approach has always been, well, I'm only fish this, and I'm going to fish this way, and I'm going to tell the fish how they're going to want. And so anyway, this is taking a different approach to it. So why Euronymphing will increase your success. And so what we're looking at in this video is the water flow of just a relatively calm section of the river. But as you'll notice in this upper part, how fast the current is. But then as we get down, this will cycle back again. As it gets down closer to the bottom, you'll notice there's a whole lot less current, which now when we look at it and we see where the fish are hanging, that we're in that lower. So here we are again, the top, you can see how fast the flags are moving, but then as we come down, how much calmer it is. So if we think of fish essentially as having an energy budget, so they need to be able to be in a position where they can feed, but they don't want to expend more energy to get food. They're going to try to be where they can be as efficient as they can. you're going to see them down closer to the bottom. So when we go jump to this next slide and we think about approaching that from fishing, and we're looking at Euronymphing versus indicator nymphing, after seeing that video with the fast current, with this indicator on here, and typically when I throw an indicator, there's usually a line on the water, and then you've got the indicator there. That's all anchoring in that fast water. So as the current's going, that's going to pull those flies. So, and yeah, there's things you can do. You can mend hard up and, you know, try to overcome that. But the majority of the time, you're going to have this happening with your line. So we're not where we need to be. When we look at Euronymphing, because we're using a straight line through, so we're using mono down to just tippet, we have no resistance really in this current with what's going on with that. So that's allowing us to get in front of the fish more. So now just that type of, that change right there, you start to see more catch-ups because you're getting in front of the fish. The next thing we're going to look at is the taking the take. So let's see, where do you go? I did something that.
You trying to change slides?
Yeah, I'm trying to do something that's not. Okay, let's go.
There you go. You got control.
So I'm going to go back to this video. So I'm going to play it. Can you-
Might have to go back and then forward to it.
Okay, so watch this fish. And this will loop back, but see this stick. And look how quickly that fish ejects that. So what I would say to you is that a lot of the times we aren't detecting takes when they're thinking, we're thinking, oh, that was a rock. Oh, that was on the bottom. But I would say the majority of the time it's probably a fish that took it in and spit it out. And you can see how quickly that happened. So when we think about fishing Euro versus an indicator, here we've got that straight line. We have that direct connection to feeling the fish. So we're going to feel that more often than this, because here we've got to see something move and change more. And then by the time we see that, now I'm pulling that all off the water. And you just saw how fast that fish kicked that out. So that's where I think it gives you another leg up. So one, we're getting to the fish, and second, we're detecting the takes. So right there in those two things, your catch rates are going to start going up. So this next thing, this next slide is talking about tippets. So when we think about, we're going to go from the surface down. So from the surface down is going to be tippet to your hooks, to your flies. So for so many years of fishing, I've always been, told about, fish being leader shy. So I'm gonna fish a 3X or a 4X because the fish aren't leader shy. So to kind of help change your thinking, if we look at 4X and we look at the area of 4X, and then we go to 5X and we see the difference there, and we go to 6X and 7X and 8X. If we go from 4 to 5, that jump of going down from 4 to 5, in a meter of tippet, the 5 is 25% smaller. And then the same thing for the 6X with the 5X, so it's another 25% smaller. And what that means is that you've got a whole lot less resistance. So I made the change to go from, I've been fishing 5X, I went to 6X, and when I started fishing with it, what I noticed immediately was that my flies seemed like they were sinking twice as fast. The other thing that started happening is when I was casting in, I was hooking fish immediately. it would surprise me because I wouldn't be ready for it. I'd throw it in thinking, oh, I got some time to do. It'd hit and there'd be a fish on. So just that change alone. So now we're looking at it when you start thinking about the current and getting down in front of them. So when we think that, you know, if we're using that 4X, the 5X, we're going to have to use heavier weights to get down to get that. But if we go to those 6 and 7s, you're going to see those sink rates. The other thing that happened when I made this change, and I started really fishing in this area, and I try to do as much with 7X as I possibly can. And part of that is to do with learning how to handle the fish at that. So the sink rates are great. You're getting down with small flies. You're in front of the fish, but you've got to learn how to fight fish on a lighter tippet. And what it does do is as you gain confidence in doing that, and trust me, you're going to burn through flies because I did. I would do like double set off, off they go, boom, and I retie them. And I forced myself for a day. I would force myself and say, you've got to just figure this out. I fished the majority of the time with 6X, and my catch rates went up substantially. Once you start thinking of Euronymphing with the rod, the leader, the tippet, it flies as a system, and you start to gain confidence in fishing that and confidence in your equipment, you can get a lot more aggressive with the fish. And man, I keep pointing at the screen trying to turn it.
I can take this.
Yeah, if you're ready, yeah, go ahead. It's not. So this is what my typical tippet setup would be. So, and this is how I fish the majority of the time in the rivers that I fish. And so I'll have my tippet ring. So we're looking at the surface being right up here. I'll put a clench knot to my tippet ring. I'll go 3 to 6 feet down to the tag, and that, what I'm trying to do is, that's based on the depth of the water. So if we're fishing in the Crooked River, we're going to be closer to 3 feet. If we're fishing in the Deschutes, it's going to be closer to 6 feet. So it's really looking at the water that you're fishing and then making that adjustment. Then I tie a tag in here that's 6 to 8 inches, and then I'll come down another 20 to 24 down to the point. And most of the time, I will fish a heavier fly here on the point. And we'll talk about it a little bit later, but a lot of times I'll fish like twin 16, size 16s there. This is a setup that works really well on the Crooked. So you fish this at about with the 3 feet coming down, having this tag go off, run a small little Frenchie here, and then run, you know, maybe if something unweighted, a midge or a Ray Charles, something like that off of this tag, and that it works really well in the Crooked. But I find this is what I use the majority of the time and have more success with it. So this always comes up about which tippet's best. And so there's a bunch of great companies that sell it, and everybody has an idea about this. But what I'm going to tell you is I think these two things right here are really what's most important, is the ability to get to the fish. And then
Say what those gates are.
well, we have Rio, Scientific Angler, Orvis, Trout Hunter, Straw, Seagar, Frog Hair. So, and the way I had it explained to me is a lot of these are made in the same factories. But there are different formulas that they use for them. So that's how you get the different strengths for the different fit or the different tippets. I personally I use Trout Hunter, and I've used it for a couple of years now. And these are the reasons why. I have great sink rates with it. It holds knots extremely well. I have confidence in fighting big fish and not breaking them off. I tend to have more hooks spit than snapping flies off. So that's the only place that I will break more flies off is when I get them stuck in a tree in the bottom or stick. So that's kind of, with Tippet, what I would suggest is, if you're confident and you're with what you have, which I think is kind of, for me, is a reoccurring theme, is if you're confident in what you're using and you're getting down to the fish and you're not breaking them off, then you fish what you like.
Yeah, it's all your Tippet fluoro then?
Yes. Yeah, and I'm fishing all fluorocarbon. I will do some dry dropper with my stuff, and if I'm doing that a lot with my Euro rod, I'll switch out from the mono. On the Tippet ring, I'll go out with just mono, and then my tag off, my dropper, I'll put fluorocarbon for that.
And on your last slide, did you explain the leader setup on the left-hand side of the screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, you said you prefer that setup. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know.
No, it's not.
It's not one to do it once I.
So maybe the batteries are
The
low.
one on the left was what he does by 95%. Now the one on the right is sort of crooked ribbons.
So we're back to this guy again. And, does the fly really matter? I think yes and no. If you look at, how discerning this fish is, and I think this happens more than we think, is if you watch very many of the underwater videos, which I think are really helpful to understand and see what's happening with the hydrology, but also understanding how fish will position in different waters, that it'll help you as you're fishing where to be thrown in at. But he's taking a stick in and rejecting it. So this next slide it's going to be looking at these are my confidence flies, and so these would be the kind of my bread and butter flies that I use. This one gets used a ton, this orange Perdigon. I usually use it as my point fly. This particular fly has ended up being another favorite of mine. It was really productive on the South San Am this year.
Which one?
This
Yeah, that's my favorite one right there.
red butt. It was great on the San Am, and it was just dynamite on the Deschutes. So great pattern. This red tag by far caught the majority of fish on the South San Am for me this year and last year. And then this Mirage is another one that has worked really great on the Deschutes and also the South San Am.
Can you tie those on different size hooks?
I do. I'll tie this down to a 16. So I go 12 to 16
on the red
on the orange Paragon. And this is where things get kind of crazy. I'm one of those, I don't know if you say OCD or whatever, but on these beads, this bead with this particular fly weighs a half a gram. So you start thinking about fishing at different levels where different fish are and changing beads and doing, so you've got your tippet that's getting you down, and then you need to be able to adjust to where you're fishing. I'll change out the different beads and talk with you a little bit more about why you go heavy versus going lighter a little bit. This tends to be a 14, 16. I fish this in a 16. And that's a 14. I primarily, the majority of the time, am going to fish 16s on both, is what I'll tend to fish. So I'll fish 6X, 7X, and I'll fish size 16 flies. Yes.
Bead size 3.3s.
That is a 3.8. That's a 3.3. That's a 2.8, and that, because it's not slotted, it's the one, it's just a 1/8. They're all tungsten. That's silver, copper, gold, and gold.
I've had good luck fishing that pheasant tail and a 12, but you know, you can always shorten the body. It doesn't have to go all the way in the hook, right? As far as your hole.
Yeah.
So I can make it tiny and still do a
Yeah.
12 or a 3.8 or whatever.
So let's pop to
Next one.
the next. So, well, another thing I wanted to cover on this is when I said, you know, does the fly really matter or not? You know, yeah, yes, it does, but at the same time, I think we, as fishermen, we tend to focus on, you know, hey, what fly are you using? When there's so many other components to it. If you're not in front of the fish, it doesn't matter if we're using the same fly. So it's getting there. But the other thing you'll notice in the makeup of these is they're not really, well, with the exception of this, it's a green rockworm. But the rest of these, they're just suggestive. They're not really that one of those, you know, they're not the bug that you go into the fly shop and that catches fishermen. These are typically the flies that nobody picks out because it's like, why would I fish that? It doesn't even look like anything. So,
You ever put those on the pointers that usually pretty good?
I switch them all around. Yeah. So the thing that makes this thing sinks like a rock. And it sinks like a rock, whether it's a 12, a 14, or a 16. If you drop it in a bucket of water, it just, there's no resistance. The same thing happens with these because of the profiles. They sink really fast. So that gives you that ability to be down in front of the fish a lot faster. Okay, let's go to the next. Okay. So this goes back to that, it's a clip of that first video, and you see where the fish are holding down in the bottom here. But also notice kind of this hierarchy of fish. So this was a real eye-opener for me because I was tending to fish a size 12 and either a 14 and a 16. And what was happening was I was catching a lot of fish, but I'd catch a bunch and then the hole would go quiet. And so I was talking with a buddy of mine, he said, drop to fish 216s, lose the heavy ones. So I dropped it to doing those 216s. My catch rates shot out of sight. And what happened was I was picking off all these fish above, and then I was getting down to these. So I started picking out more fish out of the hole. So what happens is, if we drop down in flies and we're not dropping all the way through and getting down to the bottom, we're going to pick off more fish up in here than we are down below. The other thing that happens if we fish the heavy stuff, we get down and we get the big guy, which is awesome, but the big guy is going to go all over the hole and everybody else leaves for a while and shuts it down. So that's where you get those one and dones. You get a big fish and go, okay, and then you sit there and you dredge and you dredge and you dredge. Nothing else happens. A lot of times what's happened is you've flushed everybody else out because you caught the big guy. So if you want to see your catch rates go up is drop down to those smaller flies, fish like double 16s, and you'll be surprised at how many more fish that you'll hook up with.
Will you fish the 16s the same fly sometimes, or is it?
Yeah, I tie them in different sizes.
But if you have a 16, you might have like a 216 paradons same time, or would you have a different fly?
Yeah, I usually don't fish two paragons at the same time. I mean, don't very rarely. I'll use it really more to get it down, but so I'll use something a little more natural above.
Why do you think the bigger fish prefer the smaller patterns?
Because I think fish tend to eat smaller stuff. I think that if we look at it from a fisherman's point of view, I think we tend to put on flies that we're comfortable with. So I don't know how many times, because I've always thought this would be a great cartoon, is there's the fisherman standing there and saying, I don't fish anything smaller than a 16. and the fish down below going, I don't eat anything bigger than an 18. And so I think, when we get back to kind of the premise of where I started out at the very beginning is saying, if we listen to the fish are going to tell us what they truly want. So they tend to eat. I mean, if you do any samples of a fish, you're going to see the bugs that they eat are tiny, and yet we're throwing bigger stuff at them all the time. And so I think that just naturally will increase your catch rates because it's going to look closer to the size of what they're normally eating. But sometimes it's using those variations in the flies to get to that. So if the current's such where I've got to use that heavier weight to get down, then I would vary the sizes. So I'd use a 12. A lot of times I'll fish, take the Metolius, for example. I'll use a 10 or a 12 with a really heavy, 4.6 or 3.8 bead on a Perdigon, and I'll drop it down with a size 20. Because I'm really trying to fish the size 20 in the bottom because that's where those fish are, but you've got to get there. So that's, it's varying those, but I think I tend to be more of a use small flies anyway. I think I've found I catch more fish doing that. I know as I've gotten older that, putting tippets through, which if you go to 7X tippet, it's easier to get it through them, but it's still that harder. There are certain hooks out there that go down in those small things. Daiichi makes one that's, I think it's the 1110. It's got a bigger eye in it. Orvis makes a big eye option. So you can go down to those smaller flies and have a bigger eye that you can tie on. It makes it easier to tie on.
Must have, makes really big eyes.
Yeah. So this is a section where I want to talk about the difference between doing rods. So hopefully that's kind of giving you a background of why Euronymphing is successful and where it can increase your catch rates and stuff. And so now I'm going to jump into what normally where most of the conversations start. The difference between rods. And so I brought a traditional rod and I brought my Euro rod. Is it okay if I just do that without?
Go back to the,
Yeah. So what I'm going to show you is this is just a 9-foot 5-weight. And what the difference between the two is, one is I've only got 9 feet to do it. Typically you're going to Euronymph with like this, and we're going to be fishing out off the tip. So this is really the reach, and effectively get, maybe a 45 out beyond that. If you start to get it to, and we'll go over that as we get a few more slides in, but you can see that, this is one, it's heavier. The rod's heavier, just from a weight standpoint. The line's heavier. But to me, one of the biggest things with that is when we start to look at the rod bending. So this is a 5-weight. So now I'm going to show you what this is, a 10-6 3-weight. The difference between these rods are that this first section in here is essentially going to be like a 5-weight. But the tip is going to be a 3-weight. So what it allows you to do is bend the rod a whole lot more. So one of the great things about that is you can fight big fish on light tippets because your rod will protect that tippet. So you get away with using 6X tippet on 20-inch fish. So that will protect it a ton. The other thing is the sensitivity of the rods. So they tend to be a lot more sensitive because they're made for that, for this technique. So people go in, yeah, I could use the other rod, and I would just say, I was going to say, I know we've all done this, but I'm just going to speak for myself. I've thrown streamers with a 3-weight and I've fished dry flies with a 7. But they're not the most effective. And so there is an advantage to using this type of rod in that setting. So, and then, you know, getting one that's balanced well. So, so that's, you know, I can answer questions later about those, but that's kind of where I want to, let's jump back into the presentation. And on the rods, I mean, you can spend all kinds of money. If you're just starting out and starting to do it, you know, I would go on the lower end. As you get going, if it's something you really like, then there's some great, you know, there's kind of it's like all the other rods they have. There's all those in betweens, and I would just, you know, try to get one in your hand and work with it.
Okay. No, you're not moving?
Oh, there we go. Can you move that box?
Well, that's what I'm trying to do right now. I think I can do it. There we go. I got it smaller. For some reason,
Okay.
That's what I was trying to do earlier today. I couldn't get to do it. And now it's came up. So I'm in a try.
So here's what I want to do is talk about the difference between a Euroline and what you typically have on your 5-weight. So with the Euroline, because we're using primarily just the leader out, and then occasionally that fly line is going to get out beyond. If we use the typical, our traditional rod, which is going to have a weight forward line on it, what's going to happen is as that belly comes out, because you're going to tend to probably use a shorter leader with it, because it's going to be harder to cast because the rod's shorter and it's not really made for throwing those lighter leaders. What's going to happen is you're going to end up with this belly out of the tip top of the rod, out of the tip of the rod. And what's going to happen is it's going to sag, and that sag is going to pull the flies closer to you. So it just makes it harder to get that drift. So then what's going to happen is you're going to end up fishing a lot closer to yourself. So, which means you're going to have to wade more aggressively with that. Your typical Euroline, you know, really doesn't have that head on it at all. It's just basically all running line. So, and all the main manufacturers run one. I'm currently fishing the Airflow line, and then the connection here that I use, I strip a little bit of the coating off, and then I tie a tippet ring in with a clinch knot and a little bit of super glue. And the nice thing about that is there's, you know, when I tie the leader on, I have that clinch knot, but that's it as far as going in and out of the tip top. So I don't get that big thump as something big, like a nail knot going through, or the nail knot going through. So that's.
No? No? Huh. So now I've lost my control of that. I have to stop this, restart it, just so I can have control. Not sure when that happened. What rod is your rod?
It's a Master Nymph Bellator. So, and I've had it for a couple of years. It's made in Washington. It's been a great rod. It's softer. I have a Sage ESN also. The Sage tends to throw in the wind a lot better. So I can cast further with it. I like the feel of fish on this rod better. The sensitivity in this has been is really good. That was, that's another thing that has increased that, takes, is that feeling that sensitivity and the fish. So here's what I did is I put a couple of different leaders up here, and this is something that a lot of us will spend a ton of time trying to figure out. This is a leader that Devin Olson builds. And then this is the leader and the setup that I use right now. What I'll tell you is on these, a lot of the Euro leaders that you're going to find on, Lance does them, Lance Egan, a bunch of them. When you look at them and they've got these heavy weights that start out. What that'll tend to do as you're beginning to Euronymph is those types of leaders will help you cast your flies, and they'll position the flies. So when you think about like a tuck cast, where you're coming through and you're popping it and it throws the nymphs down, straight down. These heavier leaders like this, when you have heavy butt sections, will tend to do that on its own. So as you come through and cast, those heavy butt sections will tend to throw those flies over. It makes it a little harder to have a little more delicate presentation with them. And then also as you start to go out further, they'll make it a little harder. I'm transitioned to this, which tends to roll out slower. But in doing that, it also forces me to put a little pop in the top so that I drive my flies in. So what I would say is, I think you start here with something like this, you get started, and then this becomes one of those things that you start to experiment with yourself. I went to a lot longer section of cider here, and that's just because I'm 60 years old and my eyesight's not as great, and so I tend to have almost 3 feet of cider that I see out there. And when I fish this, I try to keep my tippet ring an inch off the water is where I try to keep it the whole time. And so one of the first things you'll do is as you're Euronymphing is you'll get to where you'll feel the rocks and you'll feel the fish and you'll go, okay, that, I'm feeling that. As you get going, the thing you want to get to is where you're really focused on seeing that. And you're keeping it in that constant spot, but anytime that hesitates, anytime it does anything, is you snug it up. And so when we think about setting a hook, a lot of times you see people when they set a hook, this is gonna be really quick, is they're gonna go a long ways, but all you have to do is move your wrist and you see how far that tip goes. So if you do just a little wrist set on those, the flies are typically going to be sharp enough. They're going to hook the fish, but just that little wrist set will set those. If you're doing a big arm set, you're going to pull the fly clear out of the water. So this allows you to just do a little wrist set, and if it's not there, you let it settle and you continue on with the drift. Sorry about that, Tim. I won't do one of those anymore. I need to have somebody else work during this. So here's where we're looking at from a presentation standpoint. And this out here, I like to call the arc of reach. And so this is how far I can cast. And so how far I can actually reach with each cast. But what happens is when I do this and I'm fishing out here, and there's going to be times when it makes sense. There's going to be times when it's like, okay, I know the fish aren't clear on the bottom and I'm hooking fish out there. Or I know that I'm on this ledge and I'd like to try some stuff out there, but I can't wade to it. I can't get to it. So I'm going to fish this outside part. the thing you want to remember is your arc on this entry level is going to be coming in flat. So it's going to be reaching clear out, and those flies are going to hit and be flat on as they hit the water, which means they're going to sink slower, which means if I want to get, fish in this zone here, I need to be getting clear out on here and understanding that I'm not going to be getting to here for quite a while, right? So the optimum thing is to fish this in here where you're going to be a lot closer, where we get this type of relationship with the surface and the angle of entry. So we want to have those flies down in front of the fish. So that means you're going to come in closer, which means in order to cover more water, you've got to move. So you're either moving up and down the bank, or you're moving out, and this is, so Euronymphing does create situations where you need to be, you're going to have to wade more aggressively. Something we did a lot this year. So if you have a raft or a drift boat, this method of fishing is deadly out of a boat. And you don't have to worry about waiting because you can anchor up in spots and yet access all these. In a lot of rivers, you can do that. So you want to tuck the flies into the water. You want the flies entering like this, not like this. You want to keep the cider about 1 inch off the surface. And if you can get to where you focus on that and do that, and after a while, it'll just become second nature as you do it. As that happens, your catch rates will start increasing also, because you'll start seeing more. And all this does is creates a lot more focus in your game. The other thing is no slack from the rod tip to the surface. So there are times when you're going to throw in, and those flies are going to hit the water, and you're going to have a fish on immediately. So if we throw them in and we have this happening and we're waiting, then we can still have that fish taking that and spitting it out and being, letting it go. So no slack in the rod tip, from the rod tip to the surface. You want to keep that. And this is with Euronymphing, and this goes back to like the Polish nymphing and the Czech nymphing people would talk about. They would talk about dragging the flies through the water. So this is, Euronymphing's kind of all encompassing, where you get the Polish, the Czechs, the Spanish, the French. But what we're talking about is getting just a drag-free drift, is making the flies do what they would be floating down anyway. So we're going to try to get the best presentation, because I think we always end up with that really being kind of the number one thing, is that having a good presentation, whether you're dry fly fishing, streamers, Euro, or an indicator. And then there's this thing called the blind set. And so typically when we're fishing, we're gonna let our flies drift down, and we're gonna let them go all the way out, and we're gonna let the fly come up. And then occasionally we're gonna catch a fish. Something's gonna hit them on that swing, okay? When we're Euronymphing, if you will stop that before it gets clear out to here, if you'll stop it in here and just do that little blind set, just set it, you'll increase your catch rate by 10 to 15%. Because those fish, where we saw the one taking the stick and spitting it, they'll mouth it all the way up. And so you'll catch fish, and there'll be days when you catch more fish doing that than anything else, that they're taking it. But it's not letting it drift all the way out. It's getting it partway, at that end, setting it. And if they don't take it, you're just up here, you're back in the water. So this is a section that I used to love to fish until Ricky came in and destroyed it. This is on the Crooked River, and this is just one of those great, it used to be one of those great sections of water before everybody started Euronymphing, because when the river was completely crowded, nobody would be on this section because it was too hard to fish, because you couldn't fish it with an indicator because everything was the water screaming through. But all these little slots, all these little kind of soft spots in here, all the way up through this whole section is kind of your typical like great Euro water, full of fish, just great stuff. So this is something a lot of times we look at and go, you know, this is what really Euronymphing was made for, where we could fish the fast water and be down underneath where it's calmer and the fish are hanging. So that's one of my favorite spots. Well, it used to be till Ricky.
It's fine.
So here's another section on the Crooked. So once again, we've got all these little channels. And I'll just tell you, if you'll take the time to fish them, you'll be amazed if you're, and this granted, this takes some rock crawling. So come down to the bottom, work your way up through, all the way up through all those. You won't be disappointed in the fish you catch, because they're just, all the little nooks and crannies are full of fish. So this thing is in that, it's at the upper part of that photo I showed you earlier. And water comes down here, comes around, and it goes, main current goes out around this rock.
People at home can't see your pointers, so explain to people what it's like.
Oh, okay. So on this, on the photo on the right, the where the current comes down, these two rocks right in front, the main current goes out around them. But there's a little kind of triangle spot right behind here. And I walked up there and just wondered, you know, what the heck, would there be anything? So I popped a fly up right up in the middle of this thing and immediately hooked up with one of the bigger fish for the weekend right out of that. Landed that one and turned around and threw back up in and hooked another one. So these are the kind of spots too that you start to open up and look at from a fishing standpoint of not just that traditional water, but start to look at all these little nooks and crannies, and you'll start to get to where I'm going to throw into those, and you'll be surprised at the number of fish you're going to catch. So let's see, let's pop to this next one. So stop. So this is a section on the Deschutes. There's a big rock right above the whitewater. And then there's this soft spot right behind it. So we've got current moving fast on the outside of both of those. So on Friday, this is this last outing that we were on the Friday, I threw up in here and hooked a big fish. He took me into my backing on my Euro rod 3 times, got him back up within about 8 feet, and then he spit the hook at me. Came back on Saturday and threw right back in there, caught a smaller guy than that, but these soft spots are full of fish, but they're hard to fish with an indicator because you're trying to manage a whole bunch of line. But here I can throw in and hold my line up off, so now I just have the resistance of the tippet. So those flies, while that water's screaming out of there, those flies are just moving slowly with the lower current. And then this water right here is water that you typically aren't going to mess with, that people are going to be like, it's just there, you don't see anything. It's just, I don't know, I don't think this is your spot, but if it were, this spot right here, Kevin would be paying property taxes on it, right there. So, but what happens is, what happens with this is, in a lot of this water, so the experience I've had over the last couple of years with, and taking buddies and fishing with them and showing them spots I like to fish, is now they get in those spots. That the great thing that's come out of it is it's forced me to look for new water. And what I have found is this kind of water is completely full of fish. And so when you think about it, when they tell you, you know, this river has 2,500 fish per mile, well, they're not all stacked in those places that we typically go, is you're going to find them in these spots, because while this looks just the same on top, below Kevin's favorite spot, which I think is called Ron's Hole. Yeah, well, yeah. Anyway, when you get there and you wade on it, what you'll see is it's like a golf ball. It's got all these dimples. And so you can walk out on these little on these little sandbars, rock bars, and there's all these divots and they're full of fish. I mean, you can just ask Kevin, because we thought he was going to spend the night there. He was doing so well. But there's a bunch of sections in rivers that are just like that. So if they don't have those divots, they'll also have those rocks. You know, they'll have big boulders and stuff that they're going to hold fish. And then this is just a sampling of this year's fish of Euro. This is one that I caught with Ricky Euroing out of the raft on the South Santiam. Here's a couple from fishing the Yakima River. And then this is from the last Deschutes outing. So these guys were all taken on 6X Tippet. This guy was on 5X. I don't know. I just personally, I need to get over it, but the Deschutes fish just fight so much harder than the other places that I tend to chicken out and go with 5X. My keys to success: do the research. This is, you know, when I get ready to go fishing, the things I do, I'll look at the hatches, I'll look at the weather, I'll look at the barometer, you know, the barometric pressure, rain, wind, cloud, temperature, water levels, temperatures. But I don't view that as a go or no go. What I'm trying to do is take these and look at the probabilities of where the fish are going to be. So the barometric pressure thing is those pressure changes, where do the fish go? If it's a high pressure, they're going to tend to go lower and into more cover. So when you start to look at it, for me, when you start to look at it that way, then you start to target fish and you're starting to listen to where the fish are going to be, and so you're going after them there. Have a plan. You know, what techniques are you going to use? Sometimes you're not always going to be able to Euro everything. Sometimes you're going to have to use an indicator. Sometimes you're going to do dry dropper. Sometimes you're going to swing. It's just being proficient in those and being able to adjust and do those. And once again, letting the fish tell you how they want to fly. The types of water that you're going to target. Try new stuff. You'll be amazed at how much your fishing changes. One of the things is going to the Crooked River, and it gets crowded, you get forced to go places, is to look at it with an open mind and saying, yeah, I'm going to try that and see. Focus on your presentation. Always, I think that ends up being the number one thing, is getting that good drag-free drift, regardless of the technique you're using, is making sure that's always on point. The flies, you know, flies are important, but I think we put too much importance on them. I think there's so many other variables that with your system that you need to dial in. And then a progression to work through. So if something I'm doing isn't working, I have a progression that I'll start to work through, which will be kind of going into these changes of different tactics. I'll change up leaders. I'll change, or not necessarily leaders, but I'll change out my tippets. I'll change out the flies. You know, just kind of having a progression. So you get in those difficult days when the fish aren't doing what you'd like to do, then you start working through and have something to go through, and it'll help you deal with the frustration of, I thought, yesterday I did this and they were fine. Today they're not. So, and then I think most importantly, is confidence. So kind of through the whole theme is that doing the research, understanding where the fish are, being confident that you're going to be there in front of them, having confidence in your equipment, knowing that I can get into big stuff and I'm going to be confident, catch them, is going to the water with that. And then I use something, this is on my tying desk that I have, that I use it to remind me all the time, it's from Rick's Fly Shop, and it says, "It's not the fly, you suck." So what I try to do is keep that in mind, is that when I have those tough days on the water, is that I need to step up my game. It's not the flies. It's me not putting it where they need to be, and it's not doing that. So that wraps up that part of it. If you have questions, happy to.
There are some questions from the audience. And some
Okay.
comments.
We got one,
Just
right,
out of
Tim?
curiosity, when you showed your 4 favorite flies, it seemed like you're heavy on the jig hooks.
I do fish mostly jig hooks. My smaller stuff, so really kind of more 18s to 24s, I'll go like traditional hooks. But most of my nymphs are gonna fall on jigs, and if in that 18 area, they make these offset beads. I'll tend to use those with a heavier wire hook. The jig hooks down real small seem to be really light. And so I'll tend to go with like a Daiaku regular, 302 with an offset bead. So I get that same action. So, but yeah, most everything is.
So you can see some of the
It's
questions
jig.
there.
So as far as like what should the relationship of rod weight to tippet size, I don't think the rod has anything to do with it. I think the tippet has everything to do with the sink rate and what you're trying to fish. And so, if you're, I've caught up to 22 on 6X, fine. How I've done that though is I tend to, when I'm fighting fish, I tend to fight them with the rod low, as opposed to, I don't go up here high. I'll fight it to the side. I'll try to work them up the current. So I'll just constant pressure all the way up, get them up, and then turn them in. And then as I get them turned in and get them coming back down, then I'll lift my rod and net. If you watch Devin Olson's video on that, you'll see that. On bigger fish, you're going to get probably one good shot at it, and so that's working it up, and then plunge netting it when it gets close. The other thing I do to protect the tippet is a common reaction when a fish starts to take off is we'll grab on the rod and we'll grab the line and make it stationary, like, yeah, I'm going to stop him in this doink, is getting your drag set to where you're confident with it and just let them take it. Just let the drag work on with it. So try to keep it within that part of the system. So,
So I can ask people on Zoom to unmute and they could ask their questions.
that's however you want to do it.
Yes, so you guys, if you want to, that are on the Zoom call, you could unmute yourself and ask the question that way if you want. And then you can also use chat. And Ken can see your chat questions up there.
Does anybody have any questions in here?
Yeah, I got one. I know the answer because I asked you before, but so when you're talking about your tippet on your point fly and your dropper. So I think most of us, if we're not using the same diamond, so let's say you're using 5X, but then for your dropper you use 6X, which is how I usually do. I asked you at one time. So tell us your thoughts on that. So you got, again, you're using 5X for your main down to your dropper, and then your tag you're using 6X.
So on the tag, so you've got 6 feet, 7, 8 feet of 5X, right? And you have
From the point.
to the point, from
Yeah, to the
the
point,
tippet ring to
right.
the point.
Yep.
So let's say you've got 7 feet of 5X
Yes.
and you have 6 inches of 6X.
Yep.
You might as well fish 5X because you're not, I mean, you've got 6 inches that's going to slow your sink rate down. Or be faster, sink faster, but it's not going to go anywhere because you've got 7 feet of 5X.
Right. And that was the thing that I had asked him the question, because that's what I do. I think, all right, for the dropper, I'm gonna put the lighter stuff on. And I talked to him, he said, why do that? Why don't you put the 6X and then put the dropper at the 5? Because it's gonna sink faster with the 6. And that was a eye opener and it really worked great.
But I think if you stay just consistent all the way through,
Yeah.
just use 6.
Yeah.
So if we think of the Euro as a whole system, so I've got the drag set to give for big fish. When when you get the big fish, you've got that. You've got the rod that's going to bend like crazy. That's going to protect that tippet. You have the fly line has some elasticity in it, but then you've got 20 feet of mono leader that stretches. And then you have that, the tippet's going to stretch some. So you really have a lot of shock absorbing in that whole system if you view it as, a whole system. And if you'll let the rod do the work for you, you're gonna lose less fish. I think most times you lose fish, it's fisherman error. It's things that we put, we overload it, we grab the line, we do, just stupid stuff. And I do that all the time. Yes.
You were talking about leaving this ring just above the surface of the water. You're having 3 to 6 feet of tippet below that, even for the Crooked River. Now, I've been fishing the Crooked River a considerable amount of time, and a lot of fish, a lot of them, with lines, are only a foot to 2 foot deep. How do you fix that?
Well, so water levels change in the Crooked, right?
Sure.
And so I shorten that up. So that's always that's gonna vary. I mean, you're gonna fish, you're gonna have to adjust in those. I mean, this last time we were over there and it's at 50 CFS.
Yeah.
You've got to shorten that. So there's certain water that you get in, when you get out and you wade in it, there's still water that's this deep.
Yeah.
Out in there. So those are the things. And so you have to adjust for that. And you're going to adjust here.
You're gonna hold the ring higher.
Yeah, you're going to hold the rod higher. I mean, so
doing it by feel?
no, see, I think that's kind of a misconception of that you want to be hitting the rocks all along. Really what you want to do is you want to be just barely off the rocks above and getting a drag-free drift all the way through. Is not hanging up and dragging those through. You're going to bounce through, but you don't want to be bounce. You're going to, occasionally hit, but you're going to get to where you can kind of feel that and know I need to be up just a little bit. So, and then on the Crooked, I use a long tag on most other waters. On the Crooked, I'll shorten it up some. If you shorten it up too much, you'll foul hook a lot of fish. Because something will swipe at the top, at the tag, and you'll grab and you'll put the bottom one in the back of the fish. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on 3 spots?
I think they're really hard to fish. They can be really productive. The hard part is when you get a fish, is what happens from there. So I didn't bring it tonight, but I have a big net, and you'll see most of the Euro guys have big nets. I would encourage you with this technique is to get a big net. And one of the biggest advantages to doing it is because you're fishing like tippets, it's easier to get the fish in an opening like this than an opening like this. So you put less stress on everything and less opportunity to snap that off. The other thing is when you get them in it gives you a bigger area to work with the fish. A lot of times I'll land, if a fish is on the point, I'll get the point fly, I'll get the fish in, and then I'll lift it up and leave the tag out. So you can kind of net around your flies. 3 flies is hard. It just, but, you know, and I would encourage you with Euroing to always net your fish, unless you like to spend a lot of time re-rigging, because you'll get the little ones and they'll flip around, and the next thing you know, that tag is gone. And you're just, so it'll keep you fishing more. Yes. So I rig a dry dropper where I'll fish it off the dry off the tag.
Just the regular tag.
Yeah, so I just fixed off the tag. If I'm gonna focus on fishing that technique, and it's not just, I'm just throwing it on to do for a short period, I'll change it out and put just regular mono for the tippet down to that, and then I will from there, then I'll go down to the point, then I'll adjust that and I'll put my dropper.
So you go off the bend, you can still.
No, I just do the same thing. I stay with that same setup. And what's kind of cool about doing that is when you're fishing, like especially in the crooked, and you're fishing in those little nooks and crannies, is you can hold up and keep your leader off the water. So now you just have the fly and that dropper in, and you can fish all those little nooks and crannies and not have. The other thing is it gives you the ability to do some things that where you can fish it like on, they call it on the hinge. So you can run and use your dry fly as a strike indicator. So you can hold the dry fly just like an inch off the water. And when a fish hits, you get a bump on it, that dry fly will pop up and you set. So it's a challenge to fish with the Euro, that just the casting part of it. If there's wind, you're in trouble. More so than if you're doing traditional. Were there any other questions on the Zoom, or is that done?
That's, there was some comments, but.
Okay.
Shandy had some comments.
Okay.
But I'll add one thing. It was your question on why the jig hooks, but so Euronymphing, they're using tungsten beads because you're getting down to the fish. And so really the concept why they use the jigs is they're fishing upside down. So your hook is up and you're not getting tangled as much. So that's really the predominant reason why you.
The other thing is they say you hook in the mouth, the upper part of the mouth, which they say tends to be softer, but so I just made that. I just prefer the hooks. I think they hook better. They're sharper than heck.
Yeah,
And they come out of your finger like that. So they go in fast with a yelp, and then they come out with blood. But they, you know, I haven't had any problem with them with the, you know, just the hooking with them. And I mean, the downside to them is they're so sharp, they go into, you bury them in a stick and they're in a stick. So.
But I'll never go back to bark hooks ever again. Even when you're fishing, you always get hung up. With the bark hook, it's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Half the time you get a fish and that they'll just pop out like, wow.
Yeah.
Pretty awesome.
So there's a thank you for Ken.
All right. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate it. I appreciate you putting up with me. I've not done this before, so it's
Very good presentation. Thank you.
so hopefully you learn some things and it'll help you. So.
We're gonna take about 5 minutes here.